Interestingly, we are hardwired as humans to reproduce. That's what nature has intended us to do, more or less. So when the male ejaculates, the body immediately goes into regeneration mode to get ready for the next need to copulate and reproduce again. So because there's this priority on creating semen, the body will actually pull the nutrients from the other tissues in the body to generate sperm. So zinc is a mineral that's commonly deficient in a lot of people, specifically males. And if you happen to be deficient in it, your body's going to take track down every last bit of it in the body and send it towards the genitals for reproductive purposes. Now, I've mentioned some articles I've written in the past that I outline the specifics of why zinc is such a critical nutrient for longevity. It plays a role in the proteins that build and repair DNA. It's also been found in Italian centenarians that they've studied that there's never zinc, or very rarely, zinc deficiencies in these people. And it happens to be something that they find in a lot of centenarians is whatever's in their diet that's providing them zinc, that's what's there. And it's actually a nutrient that long-term deficiencies of it cause premature death. So some of the great things about adaptogenic herbs, superfoods, and raw foods in general is that they're so rich and abundant with so many, such a wide variety of vitamins, minerals, nutrients, complete proteins, and the like. So these things that can build libido, build the jing essence of the body, and it was the jing that was said to be contained in the gonads, both by men and women. So by spending the jing through needless ejaculation, it was said that the men would be shortening their lives. On December 3rd, 1992, there was an article on the front page of the New York Times that outlined a study done by Dr. Van Voorhees of the University of Arizona, who had been studying the sperm and reproductive capabilities of flatworms. This was just a normal garden variety of flatworms, and it's actually a common type of species used in scientific experiments because, oddly enough, the genetics of this worm are somewhat similar to humans, which is odd. So he was specifically looking at the lifespan and what things could alter that. So the main part of the experiment included 3 different groups of these worms. And one group was just sort of like a control. They didn't do anything with the worms. They just allowed them to procreate at will. So there was both male and female worms in this group. And then in the other group there was just males, so they were actually forced into celibacy. And then the other group, they actually genetically altered to be infertile. Now they were still producing sperm, but they had caused them to not be able to ejaculate when they were having sex, when these little worms were having sex. So these multi-orgasmic tantric worms were having sex continuously without ejaculating, and they weren't tiring, and they were able to keep going at it. And then the Don Juan worms were copulating, and they'd obviously have to have their break time, and then they'd be back at it, as worms do, I guess. And then the monastic group just sat there. And the results of the experiment were what was so shocking. They found that the Don Juan worms lived the shortest. They lived an average of around 8 days, and then the monastic worms were actually the next in terms of lifespan, and they would live an average of 11 days, and then the tantric worms, if we can call them that, lived an average of 14 days. So that latter group is actually quite significantly longer in terms of overall lifespan. That's almost double. It's nearing the double of the worms that were copulating at random, as much as they wanted to. And they actually repeated this experiment 4 times just because they were so blown away by the results. Now, what are the conclusions in humans? It's hard to say. They obviously haven't set up any experiments to do this in humans. It would be quite pricey, I would imagine, as it would take such a long period of time to do the research. Plus, you'd have to find people willing to do the experiment and willing to go into different groups, and they'd all have to have the same lifestyle, because they wouldn't be controlled in that sense if the people in those groups were eating completely different foods and whatnot. It's almost an impossibility to study, really. So that's what the benefit of an animal study can offer, is it's although it's not ideal, it gives an idea of something without the hassle and cost and long-term weight of a human study. Now, I had mentioned in a previous video how it's actually beneficial to be sexually active and how it's good for the health, even both for men and women. And I had talked about studies of monks who had higher rates of prostate cancer because they were sexually inactive. Now, the experiment with the nematode worms was a little different in the sense that they found that the monastic worms were living longer than the sexually liberated worms, and the only difference between worms and humans, or these specific worms and humans, is the difference in their sexual organs. So I'm not 100% certain, but I don't think these worms had prostates. So the lack of use of a prostate gland in a human monk would be quite different than a monastic worm. And that's actually something that's been looked at in other studies, is the long-term effects of level or frequency of ejaculation in a male's life and their incidence of prostate cancer. And they found that, yes, certainly, men who ejaculate regularly do have less prostate cancer than those who ejaculate less frequently. Now, my argument is that there's a piece missing here, and that's the tantric practicing worms who are withholding ejaculation.